Hello and welcome on my video blog. Today we're going to talk about how we can build a loosely coupled pipeline for Azure Custom Vision Model. My name is Sudhir and I work as an Azure Dev PMM with Microsoft New Zealand. I have provided my LinkedIn and Twitter links. So if you want to connect with me, please feel free to send a request and I'll be more than happy to connect with you. During this session, I'm going to walk you through with some sample code. So if you want to get access of that sample code, please do visit on my GitHub website and get access to that sample code. If you like it, just go ahead and put a like over there. Now let's go ahead and get started. Now today in the Azure environment, let's say I have built an Azure custom vision model under the Azure Cognitive Services. How actually I can expose that Azure custom vision model to my end user, right? Now, one of the ways is, you can provide the endpoint APIs to your users and they can actually send an image for classification or for object detection and get a response back in a JSON format. And then, they can manipulate that information. Now, let's say if I want to monetize my model, one of the way that I can do is I can actually go in, build in a serverless environment and do the entire processing on the serverless environment and provide the results back in a Power BI dashboard to my user, right? So let me just show you how that's going to work. So for example, over here, what you can see is any user from any device, they can actually go ahead and send the request to the Azure function, which is in a serverless environment that has been set up, which takes this image URL. And then what it does is it basically stores this image into the Azure Data Lake storage, right? And we created a folder called pre-processing. That's where we're gonna store that image. Now, once we have that image available, the next step is what we're gonna do is at the number 3, we're going to call the Azure Cognitive Services and we're going to send that image reference to the Azure Cognitive Services and get the response back. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the response is back in a JSON format. So what we're going to do is we're basically going to extract the information out, and based on the threshold that has been defined by the user, we're going to actually draw a bounding box around the images, right? And once we're done with that, we're going to store that information back into the post-processing folder in a blob storage. And after that, we're going to store all this information into the Azure SQL database. Then I can actually provide my Power BI dashboard for the users so that they can access the data from there, right? Now, for developer, what they can do is any changes that they want to do with the code that they have deployed onto the Azure function, what we can do is we can leverage Azure DevOps so that any changes that we do, it basically automatically goes into the Azure function. So that's what we call the continuous integration and continuous deployment, right? So you have Visual Studio Code. From there, you can check in your code, and then once you set up your CI/CD pipeline, it automatically deploy that information onto the Azure functions, right? So this is what we're going to see in today's demo. So let's go ahead and see how it's going to work. So the first thing that I'm going to show you is, let me just go on to my Azure Custom Vision model. Now you can see in the Azure Custom Vision, we provide the web UI where you can actually add the images, you can tag the images. In this case, I'm taking an example of an object detection. So I have the image, I've already tagged the objects in that particular images. And that's what you see on the left hand side. I have all the tags that has been defined. Now, once I do that, I can actually go ahead and train my model. And once I'm done with that, I can go, let's say, onto the predictions. And as you can see, I might have multiple iteration, and then I can go into the performance, and I can actually see the performance metrics of my Azure Custom Visual Model, right? Now, once I have this information available, I can go into the prediction URL and I can actually, As I mentioned earlier, one of the way you can actually provide this image, if you have the image URL, which you can pass it to the custom vision and get the prediction in a JSON format, you can use that, right? Now, instead of that, what we're going to do is, as I mentioned, we're going to actually build an Azure function. And one of the reason of choosing the Azure function for this particular scenario is because I'm not sure about it when the user is going to make the calls, right? So I don't want to have the cost of my server running 24/7. Instead of that, I basically use the Azure function. So what the Azure functions provide is, one, it's provide a serverless environment. So I don't have to be worried about what environment and how we're going to manage that environment, right? So either I've written the code which is going to run on Linux or Windows. Azure functions provide both the options, and my code is going to run seamlessly on that environment, right? So behind the scenes, the maintenance of the server, I don't have to be care about it. Now, the second most important thing is about the cost, right? Now, let's say in a day, if a user is going to make 10 calls, and then at the end of the day, I'm going to get charged for the duration of the execution of the function, right? So instead of keeping my server running for the whole day, I'm just going to get charged for the 10 calls, and probably it's going to take, let's say, 1 minute for each call. So at the end of the day, I'm just going to pay for the 10 minutes instead of paying my server, which is running for the whole day, right? So that's the most important thing. Now for that, I basically have my Visual Studio. So let me just go over there, and I have created an application, as you can see. And what's going to happen is basically whenever I'm going to make a call to my function, it's basically going to land over here, right? Now the first step that I'm doing is I basically getting the image URL, which is I'm going to pass it to my custom vision to get the object detection out of it. Then I'm checking the probability threshold, which is user defined. So it might so happen that users are only interested to see the objects in the image where the prediction is more than, let's say, 80% or 85%, right? So I'm getting that information. Then I'm getting who's submitting the request. And once I'm done with that, I basically passing this information to a function called make request. And if I go into the definition of this function, now the one thing that you will notice over here is I mentioned about the loosely coupled, right? Now what that means is all the keys information with respect to the custom vision URI, the custom vision prediction keys, the SQL Server connection string, the blob storage connection string, all that information I'm keeping outside my function code, right? So all this will get stored in a configuration setting file, so that tomorrow the same function code, if I want to run against any other custom vision model with the different keys, I can actually just go ahead and change into my configuration settings rather than changing into my function code and redeploying that code, right? So that makes life a little easier, right? So here you can see I'm doing that. And the next thing is, as I mentioned earlier, I basically storing this image into the blob storage. And this is important just in case if tomorrow the user says, this is the post-processing image that I'm able to see, but what is the pre-processing image? Can you show it into the Power BI dashboard, right? So to show that information back to the user, I need to have that information available, right? So that's why I'm storing any URL information that user sends, which contains that image. I'm storing that image back into the pre-processing folder, right, in the blob storage. Now, once I store that information, the another thing that you can see is log.log information, right? Now, this is very important in case when you are seeing that maybe the function is not working or you're not sure about it, what's happening and where the problem is. That's where you can actually use this logging mechanism, right? Now, with the help of this information, you can actually debug your code. You can look into the various information as well, right? Now, once I get this information, I basically gonna call the custom vision model with the image, and then if I'm get a response status goes 200, which is everything looks good, what I'm doing over here is I basically, based on the probability threshold, as you can see over here, if the JSON format that I got it, right? If the threshold of object identification is greater than the probability threshold defined by the user, then I'm going to create a bounding box around in the image, right? Now, before I'm doing that, as you can see over here on the line 166, I'm actually deserializing the response that I receive in a JSON format from my custom vision, right? And that makes me easier to to play around hereafter. Now, once I'm done with that, then what I'm doing is I'm uploading this post-processing image. That means after I done this piece of code over here, it basically gonna create a bounding box about the object that has been identified in that image, and then it basically storing this information back into the folder in a blob storage and generates a SAS URI. Now, why it's important? Because whenever I'm going to show this information into the Power BI is basically going to make a call to the blob storage. Now, if it does not have the key to access that image, it's not going to work, right? So that's what I'm doing. And after that, this function will also, send this information into the SQL Server, right? So that's what it's going to do. So let me just go back and show you the Azure function. So I've already created an Azure function over here. Now, once I'm done with that, I can go back to my code and I can say right click on my code and I can say publish this code, right? Now, once I created my publish profile, which is I'm going to connect it to the Azure functions that I have created earlier. Once I click on the publish, it's basically going to take all this information about my code and going to deploy onto my Azure function over here. Now, if I go into the configuration, that's what I was talking about. So tomorrow, if I want to change the custom vision URI, or if I want to change the prediction keys, I can actually go and do that from here, right? Even if I want to change any other connection strings, I can go and do it and quickly change it from here, right? Now, that's one of the way. The other way of doing it, you can actually store all this key information in Azure Key Vault and get access from there, right? But for now, the concept is we are storing all this information outside of the function code so that tomorrow, if you want to change anything, we should be able to do it easily, right? Now, once I have this function deploy, I can actually go and now test it. So here's my Postman through which I'm going to make a call. And as you can see over here, this is my endpoint, and I'm providing the code to access this endpoint. And if I go into the headers, you can see I'm providing my image URL, I'm providing the probability threshold, and I'm providing the user who's sending this information. So for example, this is sent by vendor, just say vendor user 1, and I'll just click on send. So now it's going to send this information to the function, and the flow that we have talked about it is going to do everything, and then it's basically going to give me the response back. And now you can see I get the response back as well, right? Now similarly, I can actually go and do with the vendor user 2, and again I can say send it, and it will get me the response back. Now, if there is any problem with any of these information that we are sending to the API, for example, the probability threshold we are expecting as an integer, but just for the test, I'm sending as a string. And let's send it. And now you can see it basically gives me an error, right? Now, once I have this information, if I go onto my Storage Explorer, so you can see the post-processing image, it does not contain anything. Even the pre-processing image, I've cleared it. But since we make 2 API call, now you can see I have 2 images stored onto my pre-processing folder in my Azure Blob container, right? So if I double click on this, and once it's get downloaded, we can have a look how that file is going to look like. And let me just move into my other screen over here, and this is how it's going to look like, right? Now, Let me just go into the post processing, and this file ends with 10509. So I'll go to the post processing image folder and 10509 underscore results. So I'll just open this as well, and I'll show you the outcome of it. And again, it shows on my another screen. Let me just bring it over here. And now you can see it basically create the bounding box based on the threshold that has been defined by the user. And now you probably can notice that it basically puts the text as well. So apart from the bounding box, it provided text as well, right? So all this, instead of my user is going to do it, I'm basically providing this feature to my user. And then if I go to my SQL Server, if I click on run, I have all this information available onto my SQL Server as well. So you can see these are the two calls that we have made just now. This is the pre-process image URL, the post-process image URL, and who the user are, right? And similarly, if I go to my Power BI report, as you can see right now, we don't have anything, but as soon as I'm going to refresh this, it's going to get the data. And I should be able to see the same results over here, right? So as you can see, and now I can actually go ahead and, just go ahead and play with the filters, and I can see that information over here, right? So that's all I have for the today's video blog. I hope you liked it. And if you have any questions or any concerns, just create a pull request. And even if you want to contribute into the sample code, feel free to download the code, create a PR request, and happy to contribute with you. So with that, thank you so much for your time, and have a great time ahead. Bye and take care.